Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another GM's Corner. This week we're doing a viewer requested video, which is how do I prepare for running an adventure based on one of the Pathfinder adventure paths. I'm going to give you my process. Not everyone will do this in the exact same way, and that's totally okay. But this is definitely what works for me, and hopefully it can work for you. And obviously I'm going to talk about the Pathfinder adventure paths. Pathfinder is really the focus of my channel, but this really goes for any pre-written module for any system that you might want to run. So whether you're running one of these handy-dandy 2nd edition 3-volume adventure paths that are fairly quick to get through, or you're running one of the more old school 6-volume adventure paths that take like a year and a half to get through, or if you're running some deluxe collector edition all-in-one book adventure path, it doesn't really matter. The process essentially stays the same. So why should I run an adventure from an adventure path? That seems like a reasonable place to start. Obviously, I've been role-playing and being a GM since the late 90s, essentially. And in that time, especially earlier, sort of high school period, college period, and then right out of college going into work for about 5 years, I did not run pre-written adventures. I always not only wrote my own adventures, but often I created my own worlds. For a long time, if you go online, you could find Elysium Nebula, which was a custom science fiction setting, and I ran a lot of Elysium Nebula games on back then what was the Wizards of the Coast play-by-post forum for 3rd edition and 3.5 edition D&D. I created my own sort of custom D20 modern setting called Afterlife, which was basically a sort of weird take on Fallout, but more magical and kind of, it had a post-apocalyptic vibe, but it was set in kind of an afterlife. And then a bunch of other sort of settings, homebrew stuff that I had built over the years, and it would be really fun for me to introduce these worlds to my players. But then what started to happen, probably I would say about 5 years into my professional career, I think this happens to a lot of people as they get into their 30s and even more so into their 40s. Work becomes harder. You need more and more sleep to operate. That's just something that happens. People slow down. And then people start having families. And so if you're a forever GM like I am, it suddenly becomes really difficult to dedicate the time and attention to building something completely homebrew. So it was around 2008, I think, that I first ran this adventure path, Rise of the Rune Lords. And part of the reason that I ran an adventure path rather than write my own story for that as well is there was a particular event. Me and some friends got together over a long weekend. We called the event The Dorkening, and we decided that we were just going to play D&D or Pathfinder through the entire period. And I had no idea how much material we would get through. You know, I was used to prepping for 2 or 3 hour sessions. I wasn't used to prepping for multiple days where we would play essentially for hours and hours. And I wasn't sure how many breaks we would take. And so that was kind of the impetus of saying, okay, well, I'm going to go and pick up one of the pre-written adventure paths, and I know the system well enough that I can just dynamically run this without having prepped everything. And so I had a wet erase battle map, I had my wet erase markers, and I knew I was just going to do this live with them, and I wouldn't have prepped everything. And what was remarkable is it worked. I didn't need to do that much preparation. So why would you run an adventure path? Well, firstly, it's so much less work. Secondly, the stories are still great. And there's so many modules out there that you can find the story that's right for you and your group. I did a video very early on the channel called Choosing Your Own Pathfinder Adventure Path that talks about all of the 1E adventures. I do plan this year to do one like that for the 2E adventures as well. That's still in the works. But the point in referencing that video is that there's so many different kinds of stories. So if there's a story that you want to tell that you would normally use a homebrew world to tell, you can probably find something reasonably similar in a pre-existing module and then adapt that. So overall, I've just had really good experiences. You know, I think I've mainly been running pre-built adventures for the past 20 years, and I've just had really good experiences doing it, so I highly recommend it for all of you. Okay, so I've persuaded you now to run a pre-built adventure. Where do you begin, right? So the first thing that I would recommend if you're planning to run a pre-built adventure is that you read the whole thing. I know it takes a lot of time. You know, one of the reasons that I like to have the physical books is because I put them by my bedside table and I work through it the way I would a novel. I just read the whole thing cover to cover from beginning to end. You can look at outlines online and you can find summaries, and typically for the Pathfinder adventure paths at the beginning of each book there's kind of a little bit of a here's what's coming, but for me there's no substitute to knowing what the story is from beginning to end, so you kind of just have to read it. So that is typically my step one. The second thing that I do, and I'll add one more thing, as I read it, if you are reading a PDF, I would add notes, figure out how to do that, add notes to your PDF, because there are things as you go through it that you'll want to add notes to and potentially refer back to as you figure out how you're going to craft this story to fit you and your group. And then if you're reading from a physical book, sticky notes, really useful. You'll see on my edition here of Rise of the Rune Lords, little sticky notes that I've added to the book that reflect notes that I made as I went through my original reading that just stayed there throughout. So annotate as you go. It'll also typically help with the retention of the information, just interacting with it in that way. Right, so once you've read it, the second thing that I would do is write your own version of an outline of the adventure path. Now, like I said, the adventure paths do tend to have a little bit of a preamble at the beginning of each of the books that tells you what happens in that book. And typically, if you go to pathfinderwiki.com, you'll find adventure path summaries, and you can click to each of the books and you can see what the summary is there. But different people learn in different ways. I'm a person that learns by doing. So part of the reason I think I have an encyclopedic knowledge of the Pathfinder universe now is because I've made these videos. So every time I make a video, that information seeps in a more concrete way than if I just read the information and then moved on to do something else. So depending on sort of your learner type, maybe this will be less valuable for you. But I find that it's really valuable for me to write an outline of the whole adventure. Just a simple Word doc with bullets that runs through, what are the key things. And what that essentially does is it creates the structure of the adventure in your head. And so later, if called upon, you will have that whole structure sort of memorized. So for example, this is War for the Crown. All of you know that I ran War for the Crown as part of my Pathfinder 616 series. That's all up on the channel right now. For this adventure path, I had the entire outline memorized. So I knew that in book one, there would be the Exaltation Day massacre, and that the players would escape underground and eventually rescue Princess Eutropia's childhood friend Martella Lothide, cementing their relationship with the princess and thus becoming heroes of the realm who will help her ascend to power. Book two, they travel to Moret County, they build support for the princess. They try to oust Bartleby Lothide, who is Martella's half-brother, and in so doing, they allow Princess Eutropia access to funds that she had stowed away in the Palace of Birdsong, which Bartleby was holding. In book three, they go to Avon Prefecture. In Avon Prefecture, they've got to solve a number of little mysteries, like what's happened to the cavalry, and they also learn that Eutropia's brother Carius has been resurrected, and they go and rescue Carius and return him to the princess. In book four, they chase down Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius, and this has been the kind of the overarching villain for most of the adventure, but his defeat ultimately does not allow Grand Princess Eutropia to come to power because there's still other contenders to the throne, and most people don't believe that the primogeniture vote passed, so there needs to be some other proof that she's a worthy successor. The heroes discover about a thing called the Lion Mantle, which would theoretically validate that she's a worthy successor. So finally, book five, they travel to the Outer Plains. In the Outer Plains, they acquire the Lion Mantle. They encounter the Herald of Norgorber, and against all odds overcome him, and will return to the material plane to discover that Grand Princess Utopia has been assassinated, and that the mastermind behind this plot is the Archwizard Penavar Lothid, which may have been teased throughout, but they only really understand, I think, around this book, who the real villain is. They confront Penavar Lothid, defeat him, but that's still not enough, because Eutropia's brother Carius has been corrupted, sits on the throne, and he needs to be purified and cleansed, and that finally brings a close to War for the Crown. So I've just spoiled War for the Crown. That's okay. My own version of events differ pretty substantially from those events, but knowing what happens in what order really helped me make those dynamic decisions. So for those of you that have watched the series, you'll know that I completely invert two of the books. So I go, instead of going from book 3 to book 4, I run book 5 first, then book 4, and then book 6, and that's because I wanted Grand Strategos Pytherius to last a little bit longer. And also some stuff happened in the game. I also introduced Penavar Lothid much earlier. The heroes knew that he was kind of the mastermind villain much earlier than the story would traditionally intend. And all of those dynamic decisions I can only make because I have a firm grasp of the story. So I know when I change something, what the downstream implication is going to be. Now, changing little things will often have more of a cascade effect than you think it might. Even a small change early on can have a pretty significant change. But the more that you know the story inside and out, the better equipped you'll be to make those changes and make the story a little more personal. And this all finally brings me to part 3, which is sort of tied back to my first GM's Corner, which is running a session 0 and incorporating character backstory. So typically, I will align with my players on what my next adventure path is going to be. I will do my due diligence and read through the adventure path and do an outline and understand how the adventure is structured. And then I'll do that session 0, so go back and watch that GM Corner if you haven't, and understand what my player characters want to play. And I will encourage my player characters to, pick backgrounds and experiences that tie to major events in the story, so it's less of a lift for me to incorporate elements of their backstory into the story. For example, I know that in Bloodlords, in Chapter 3, there's some stuff related to Hollomog. And so when we sat around our session 0, I said, hey, if anybody wants to play a character that comes from Hollomog, that would be really cool, because there are some connections between Geb and Hollomog that I would like to explore in this game. And I had a player go, yes, I would love to do that. And that ultimately makes all the backstory stuff much easier. Once I've done my session 0 and my players have decided what they want to play, I do another pass through the entire books. And essentially what I try to figure out is, how can I sort of give equal screen time? So if I've got 4 or 5 players, how do each of my players connect to the elements that we're exploring in the story? And how can I find moments in the story to explore character backstory? And so in so doing, by the end of it, I've got already a slightly altered version of the adventure path that feels more grounded in my players' personal journeys. In terms of the actual execution of the game itself, one thing that I recommend that you do, there's a bunch of, especially in the Pathfinder adventure paths, a bunch of monsters that are references to other things. So like, check the Games Mastery Guide for this trap, or check the monster manual for this creature. All of that stuff, I think, obviously when you come to the game table, just it's worth, if you're running it over kitchen table style and you're not doing VTT, I recommend that you get a printer if you don't have a printer, and you just print off all of the additional material that you need, as opposed to having a tablet where you're looking up creatures. Because if you have a tablet where you're looking up creatures, you will be constantly jumping between tabs, because encounters will often feature multiple creatures. But really, the great thing about running an adventure from an adventure path is most of the maps, most of the encounters, they're all sort of figured out for you. So typically, my adventure prep for an individual session is quite low. If I know there's going to be a combat encounter, I go and grab all the creatures I need. I print sheets for the creatures so I have them for quick reference. Then I will if I've purchased the map pack, I'll use that. If I haven't purchased the map pack, what I'll do is I've got a big wet erase grid, and I'll just get a wet erase marker and I'll draw the maps on the grid. And then once the session is done, I can just erase it and I never need to worry about it again. It's a super worthwhile pickup. But yeah, that's basically it. I don't have to spend too much time reviewing monster abilities and all this kind of stuff because I'm fairly familiar with the system. Early on, I had to do more of that. I'll also say that second edition is easier than first edition for this stuff. Pretty much all the information is written directly on the monster profile. So in the net, running an adventure path from a module is a huge time saver, but I do recommend taking the time to know the story inside and out. So even if your player's surprised to, you can react dynamically, and also taking the time to weave your player's backstory into the story you plan to tell, which does mean creating a little bit of material yourself, but that's fine. It's still going to be a lot less work than if you built the adventure whole cloth. Anyway, that's all my advice in terms of running an adventure from an adventure path. I hope this was useful to you, and I look forward to seeing you soon for another GM's Corner.